The first question I and everyone else asked when El Camino was first announced was, why? Breaking Bad is well known for having one of those perfect finales, a rare thing in the world of television. And yet 6 years later, Vince Gilligan decided for some reason that the story needed to continue. More specifically, the story of Jesse Pinkman had to continue. Whatever his thought process might have been, he made this movie, and now we can watch it. And when it first released, I thought El Camino was a pretty great send-off to Jesse Pinkman, and over the years I've watched it several more times since then. Most recently as part of my full watch through of both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Has my opinion on it changed at all? In this video, I'm going to try and find out if El Camino manages to justify its own existence, or if it's just 2 hours of wheel spinning. I'll get all the obvious stuff out of the way first. From a cinematography standpoint, it looks fantastic. It's got all the creative shots and sweeping Albuquerque vistas we've come to expect from Breaking Bad, now with a flair of a big budget movie, all in glorious cinemascope. The instant standout is of course the overhead shot of Jesse tearing the apartment to shreds, which makes perfect use of that wider aspect ratio, and the time lapses are better than ever. They did go with digital for this project as opposed to the 35mm film from the original show, and the end result is like if Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul had a baby together. The soundtrack's also great as expected, both for pre-existing song choices and the original score by Dave Porter, which you can only get on vinyl for some bizarre reason. Special shoutouts to both the apartment montage and end credit songs. Let's also get the elephant in the room out of here, which is how distracting some certain characters' appearances are. Todd is easily the worst, since he's a pretty important part of the film, second billing in the credits right after Aaron Paul. You do get used to it eventually, I guess, but it was honestly all I was thinking about anytime there's a close-up of his face. I'm guessing Jesse Plemons had other commitments, or didn't have enough time to get into shape with the secrecy of the production, or he just didn't think some lame Netflix movie was worth the hassle. The other standout is Bryan Cranston in the Denny scene, which I honestly wasn't bothered by at all. Obviously the guy isn't going to shave his head for real for one scene, and outside of that first shot in the hallway, I straight up just didn't notice it. It is kinda weird how much better he looked in Better Call Saul though. Maybe he had less hair to stuff into the bowl cap or something. It also probably helps that both his scenes in Saul are in pretty dark lighting, while in this movie his shiny head is on full display. Anyways, talking about the actual movie now, Felina ended with Jesse driving off screaming happily like me after a couple beers. Technically his ultimate fate was ambiguous, but to me at least, and Vince Gilligan himself, it was clearly meant to be him driving to freedom. Who knows what wacky shenanigans he gets up to before reaching that endpoint, but it's freedom regardless. This movie was obviously made to fix that apparent mystery of where Jesse went, and what we're left with is 2 hours of the most predictable adventure you could imagine, just to end up with Jesse driving to freedom. Again. There's nothing outright bad about any of the scenes, it's all logical and makes sense, but for a movie coming 6 years after Breaking Bad ended, that apparently just had to be made, the whole thing is pretty much nothing to say. When Better Call Saul was announced, I'm sure people questioned why bother making a show about the funny lawyer, but that show added so much to the funny lawyer that he became the de facto main character of the entire franchise, and a truly tragic one at that. This movie is about Jesse specifically, but we don't learn anything new about him. I mean, technically we do. Large swaths of a runtime are dedicated to this wacky off-screen adventure he had with Todd in between Granite State and Felina, and I guess we learned that he might go to business school at some point, but in terms of his actual character, like who he is, not so much. Instead of this movie being made to bring some more depth to Jesse Pinkman, it just exists to tell us how he got from point A to point B, with dollops of fan service on top to keep people watching. Speaking of fan service, let's talk about those flashbacks for a second. El Camino basically has two plot lines, at least for the first half. The post-Felina present day plot, and the day out with Todd. The story with Todd was entertaining, don't get me wrong, but I'm struggling to find a reason why it's here, beyond padding a pretty bare bones plot to 2 hours. Well actually I can think of one reason, which is that we needed to establish Todd's apartment so that Jesse can go there to find his money. So it once again makes sense plot-wise, but it all just feels so pointless beyond heaping more trauma on top of that giant pile. There's also the Mike scene at the start, which is pretty good and retroactively gives a reason for Jesse randomly choosing Alaska when he's about to be shipped off in Confessions. The Walt scene is probably my favourite, not just because those actors are so good together, but also because it gives us one more look at them when they were still on good terms, since this scene is right after 4 days out, which is probably the peak of their relationship, minus the whole getting stranded in the desert thing. The last one is of Jesse and Jane, which along with the Walt scene, reinforces the overall theme of making your own choices and going your own way, which is appropriate for the guy who spent the whole show being manipulated by basically everyone. It's also just cool to see Jane again, since I always much preferred her to Andrea, both as a character on her own, and in relation to Jesse. Andrea was pretty much just there to have plot-related things happen, whether it be her connection to Combo's murder or giving Walt a kid to poison. Jane felt way more fleshed out and had way more impact on both Jesse and Walt. Another pretty big issue with this movie is the villain. Since literally every notable character from the original show is either dead or not in the picture anymore, Vince had to come up with a new character to fill the villain role. And what did he come up with? The guy who made the chain holding Jesse in the Nazi torture lab. Yeah, Vince decided to create a character, then retcon that character into Jesse's past, so they have a reason to have beef with each other. When I first watched this movie, the scene where he's acting like Jesse's supposed to know who he is had me thinking he was some random character from Breaking Bad I just forgot about, but later on they show us the epic backstory of Neil the Welder guy, where we can see him with the Nazis trolling Jesse. When it comes to Breaking Bad villains, they can be really menacing, have layered backstories and motivations, or just really fun to watch, but Neil unfortunately isn't any of these. Instead taking after the Nazis from season 5 and just being kinda boring, but at least the Nazis had some impact on the plot. I do like the Wild West shootout scene, and I really dig the initial plot twist where it's revealed the two cop guys aren't actually cops at all, but those are about the only two things he brings to the table. I wonder if this movie even needed a villain at all. I feel like just Jesse trying to get to safety while evading the feds would have been more than enough to fill a movie, but apparently not. Neil genuinely adds nothing to this movie, beyond giving Jesse someone to shoot at. Now let's talk about the best part of this movie, Ed the Disappearer. The breakout star of the best Breaking Bad episode has a pretty substantial role in this movie, which for me is almost enough to make the whole thing worth it. Robert Forster is truly a gift from the gods, and he continues the streak from Granite State of having the best one-liners.
Seriously, yo. Pathetic.
Wow, you love that response time.
When they shot
If
someone,
you believe that you can pull on people's heartstrings, you should take your chances with the police. From where I sit, you made your own luck, as did your former partner, as did your lawyer.
He's rightfully annoyed at Jesse for leaving him hanging the last time he came to pick him up, so he trolls him for a bit to make up for it. Out of all the random returning characters in this movie, Ed's the only one that really makes sense, although it makes me question again if his services are really worth it at all. For 125 grand, or even 250 in Jesse's case, all you're getting is a new ID and an Uber to some random state, unless you're a special case like Walt. Why wouldn't you just take that money and do it yourself? In fact, Ed even tells Jesse to do exactly that, but I guess he's too lazy. Saul couldn't even last a year in his new life before being found, and then he was almost going to drop another 125 in the same shit again. Anyways, I'm just happy Robert Forster is in this movie. I should probably touch on the other characters who show up as well. Badger and Skinny Pete's scenes were definitely highlights. It was cool seeing how loyal they still are to Jesse, even after he basically ignored them for most of the last 2 seasons. Special shoutouts to Skinny Pete for coming up with a whole car switcheroo plan, and even giving Jesse his sacred beanie. And thanks to Better Call Saul, we know their plan ended up working, at least according to Francesca. All their scenes felt pretty natural, so no complaints here. Although it's weird they had that scene of Petey with the cops that was used for the teaser trailer, but is nowhere to be found in the actual movie. Junkyard Joe also shows up for like 5 seconds, which ends up having no point beyond making magnet references and letting Jesse know that Johnny Law is en route to his location.
Look, Johnny Law is on his way, as in here, as in now. So farewell, goodbye, regrets, etc., etc.
Jesse's parents also make an appearance. First on the TV when they try to get him to turn himself in, and then later on when he trolls them into leaving their house to come pick him up. I actually quite like these scenes. We haven't seen Jesse's parents since season 3, so their return puts into perspective how much Jesse's life gone down the shitter since then. And in a story that's just focused on Jesse, bringing his parents back into the fold is a pretty good choice. And that's pretty much all the major appearances from Breaking Bad characters. I have no problems with characters returning to impart some wisdom or give us some new insight into the story, like the time machine scenes in Soul Gone, but when a solid third of a movie is taken up by random Todd shenanigans, it gets kinda distracting. I really don't have much else to say about El Camino. I appreciate the attempt to give Jesse Pinkman some proper closure, but at the end of the day, I think we would have been better off without it. There's plenty of good stuff to be found here, but the overall lack of purpose just makes me wish we left this part of the story to the imagination. It could have been worse, but it could have been so much better. Hopefully Vince learned his lesson, and we can let Soul Gone be the final note in the story of this franchise. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.